It's part 2 of a demonstration of how I created a recent nature-inspired abstract tissue paper collage that reflects the beauty of what you may consider a simple fish, specifically an Atlantic salmon. I'm Melinda. Welcome to my studio. I have out my 2 5x7 gel plates to show you, as promised, how I created some of the texture. This is a $1 cat scratcher I found at the Dollar General near camp, and iridescent graphite to keep with the glossiness required to look like the side of a salmon. If you missed last week's video, you will want to hop back to see how I created the other colors and texture for Salmo Salar. It's important to keep the layer of paint thin, but I didn't get quite enough paint the first time, so added some more. Spread it out thinly and was struggling to get rid of those horizontal lines from the edge of my brayer. Lay down the texture and try to stamp it on the other plate, which can work, but as you can see, there wasn't enough paint. So I decided to roll off what was left on my brayer for a more delicate look. Ideally, I would get another with some stamping instead of removing the pattern to work in the lighter area of the collage, which I didn't have time to do for this demonstration, but that's okay. This layer has to dry completely. I moved the plates closer together so I could fit them both on one piece of the medical exam paper I had cut from the roll, and I'm using golden gloss medium. The gloss medium is best for translucent papers, and for this I also needed the glossy look. Be careful using the gloss medium for a pull layer, because if your paint layer is not totally dry, it will pull up some of your color, which can totally destroy a design or pattern. As mentioned, the tissue paper I am currently using almost solely in my tissue paper collaging is medical exam paper, and I will link to this brand in the description. Apply it as evenly as possible, and again, this layer needs to dry completely. The first part of the pull was going well, but then disaster. It wasn't wet enough to be able to just reapply it, so here's a trick. Gloss medium. Get back out the gloss medium, apply some, brayer it out evenly as you would typically. Reapply your paper, and again, let it dry totally. Apparently I hadn't let this one dry as well as I should have. While it was drying, I got out the art journal that I have previously used in videos for practice and demonstration pieces, and there was a problem. My pages had stuck together because I had forgotten to put parchment paper between my heavily acrylic papers. I decided to see how much of the piece of one page that was adhered to the next page I could peel off and use the medium reapplication trick. In this case, I used golden satin glazing liquid, which is what I typically use as my adhesive in my tissue paper collaging. The paper I am gluing this back to is not tissue paper, or there would be no repairing this part of the piece. Then I, of course, had to let this dry before I could turn the page to make my demonstration piece. This time I used the parchment paper to keep them from sticking together again. Here is the texture back. Looks pretty cool through the glass. Glass cutting boards are a great surface to use the gel plate on. As you can see, I can move them out of my workspace, place them elsewhere to dry so I can keep working in the same spot. You can flip them over without the gel plate falling off, so you can check progress on things if you need to. These turned out pretty well, but I am having more trouble with wrinkles, so I may have to reconsider how well medical exam paper works on the gel plate. Getting out the satin glazing liquid, which, as I mentioned, I use for my tissue paper collage, and I put it in a condiment bottle for easy application. Here is my favorite brush for the application. When I got out papers left over from the original Salmo Salar, I noticed some texture that I had neglected to make for this one, and it is accomplished with just simple, inexpensive kitchen silicone brushes. Committing to how to start may be one of the most difficult parts of a project like this. I did dither a bit. Here is the leftover gold to show you as a comparison of why the new gold is not what I was going for. I had applied it way too heavily. Gold is not the place to start with this, at least that's not where I wanted to start, but I did wanted you to see the difference. I have double speeded things now. As mentioned, I said a little bit of the graphite would go further than it would appear. I decided to start with some texture. And where I first decided I wanted to place it isn't where I ended up placing my first piece. I decided I wanted something with a straighter edge and start on an edge. As I said, committing to that first piece of paper to adhere is maybe the hardest part of a piece like this. But the bullet must be bitten. And I decided I didn't want that other scaly piece to be the next one. This particular condiment bottle, I do not like the cap. The cap is useful, although the satin glazing liquid does not dry so much in the bottle as the gloss mediums. It's still best not to have it open, but that cap does get in the way, and unfortunately, if they're not attached, I have a tendency to lose them. Here I'm working with the straight edge of one of the gel prints along my straight edge at the top of my page. The paper of this art journal, I didn't remember having so much trouble with it being too soft and absorbing so much of the adhesive, but I am struggling with that a bit here. When I had tried to link to this particular journal in a previous video, I found that it is no longer produced, so I won't be linking to it for this purpose for multiple reasons. For this part of the salmon, to get things going, I am working with strips of iridescent graphite. At this point, I was concerned about staying too dark too far down my page for my gradient, so I used a strip of my lighter dark gray, if you will. Although this section will be the most textured and have the fewest visible strips of color left, it's a good way to lay down that base layer of color in the darkest area of the piece. When I get to the end of what you will see in this video, one area that does bother me a bit is that texture piece that's already there and how it shows so much white. The rest of this section will have no more visible white. So if I go back and more complete this piece, that will be one area I will deal with. Starting to add some gold. I did try the darker gold that had a lot of good texture in it and wasn't too vivid. The edges are a little darker than I would like. I decided to use a little bit of the gold to show you the difference of how it looks just on white. And again, that is something I will come back later and modulate. That I will push back a little and darken to better fit the rest of the area. As you can see, I added some of the silicone brush stripes. The texture that I'm adding now is rather blunt and basic. There will be more blending later. And I don't know if you can see the shadow of my fingers. I've mentioned in a past video how filming myself making art and then editing the videos, I see how much I kind of think with my fingers. If you ever see me pausing and rubbing my fingers, it's typically because I'm thinking and considering. But in most videos where I am more closely editing them, I cut a lot of that not putting anything down on paper out. But this is speeded up, and it does give you a little bit better idea of the process as opposed to me just keeping the action totally running. But again, I value your time, and I don't want you to have to sit there just watching me dither for twice as long. Continuing to build the layer using varied strips of paper. I like the not clean edges. I don't want it to look stripy. And that's true in any of my tissue paper collage. I don't like straight edges. Sometimes if I like the edge of a print or a piece of tissue paper that I've painted, I will use it along an edge where I don't mind having a line because there's a line naturally there. It's not as great in a piece like this where it's representing a smaller part of something. So the inspiration isn't a rectangle, it wouldn't be shaped like that. It works better in an abstract landscape. I have a piece of paper stuck to my finger, I see. I needed something to set my brush on, so I had a convenient roll of masking tape that I accidentally left out from another project. But yes, holding the brush in one hand and working with the paper one-handed wasn't really working, and I didn't want to get any extra sticky stuff on my work surface that I didn't need to. Adding more of this cat scratcher sort of fish scale texture and some more textured gold. I'm probably debating here if I want to move on to my pink or add a little more texture first. I do not want any white spaces. I'm not exactly sure what I was trying to show there. I guess the texture and how you can use the dark color to blend it in with the dark color around it, as opposed to just having a piece of gold stuck in the middle. I do like how that blends in. It's, especially on the one side, difficult to see where it begins and ends. And that is another thing I really like when I'm working with translucent layers, is being able to blend out any harsh edges. So it becomes progressively difficult to see where one piece ends and another begins. There is a place for that, but in general, I prefer to have it more cohesive, for lack of a better word at the moment. I prefer things to blend together as opposed to having harsh edges. That's an interesting texture piece there. Has a little bit of everything. And here I am moving into the pink. Again, with the papers I created in last week's video, I was more heavy-handed with the pink as I was with the gold. Not to quite an extent, but it does lack that pearlier, more translucent effect of the original piece. But this piece does give you an idea of the process. If it's something you would like to examine for yourself. I also worked with overall larger pieces to give a more detailed look of what I was doing. There I am using one of the straight edges, but it doesn't have a harsh line, so it works there without adding a blocky frame to something that should give the impression of continuing beyond its edges. I'm looking for the lighter area of this, and the center of that paper was lighter, so I'm using that to work on creating more of a gradient. The side of the salmon, if you've looked at as many pictures as I have, it starts with the dark spotty area at the top. For the Atlantic salmon that the original piece was named for, it has more distinct spots. And I think I addressed that in last week's video, why I didn't have as many distinct spots. That piece of pink has a good translucence to it, but I also had not gotten these as glossy as those in the original piece. So I'm starting to work down creating the pink section of the fish, but again, trying to blend. Putting the original pieces isn't going to give the blend you can get later. And here is where I realized, oh, this isn't as glossy as I want it. I should be using the gloss medium instead of my usual satin finish. So this is where I started using the gloss medium. You may notice later in the video that I'm getting a lot of glue built up on my fingers. Well, medium built up on my fingers. The medium I'm using is glue. Oh, there's using some gray to blend the edge of that pink in with its surroundings. Back to the medium. One particular reason that I enjoy using the golden satin glazing liquid as opposed to the gloss medium or even the matte medium when I am building a collage is your fingers get so much less sticky. With the mediums, I will actually end up with a peelable coating, which I was going to show you a bit in the video, but I had to leave the piece and had to go on about some other tasks and things, and I couldn't just leave the thick layers of glue on my fingers. But yes, The golden satin glazing liquid does not build up like that. Not that you don't get sticky at all, but it is so much more manageable and you don't end up with that thick layer. So in retrospect, I could have just added the gloss medium later. And I honestly can't remember if I was adhering the original pieces to my canvas with gloss medium or if I was sticking with my typical glazing liquid. But as I don't remember my fingers getting so built up with my adhesive, I think I must have used the glazing liquid, but I also remember using gloss medium in the final layers. So either way, satin glazing liquid is the more convenient and easy to work with. And as I added several layers of gloss medium at the end, what I adhered it with isn't as important. I didn't lose the gloss of the papers, and that's another difference with this piece compared to the original, is all of my papers I achieved a better glossy look. Here's me blending in some more of the pink. So, yeah. To make this one more like the original, I should have used more gloss medium and less paint on the gel plate, and then adhering it with the less glossy medium would still have kept it looking glossier than these papers look. And I also did have areas on that where the original paper wasn't as glossy. So another thing I had to do at the end of that one was add more gloss medium to those areas so I could work on achieving an even sheen across the entire piece before it went on display at the Salmon River Fine Arts Center as part of the annual juried art show Hooked on the Salmon River. Baby wipes are always handy to have on your work table. With as frustrating as salmon season can be in the area with the influx of fisher people, it is an important part of the area's economy. And the majority of you probably have never heard of the Salmon River. Although there probably are other salmon rivers. The Salmon River that runs through central New York, including Pulaski, which is where the Salmon River Fine Arts Center is located, which is not very far from the village I live in. I had started my pink gradient, but here I really got back into the texture of the top side of my fish. Well, my abstract rendition of it. There are so many interesting and even amazing patterns and colors and intricacies in nature to inspire art making. This piece was a bit of a departure for me and definitely a different color palette than I have been working in, and definitely more muted and softer. And it's the first piece in which I really actively tried to catch more of the essence. That's not really a strong enough word either, because it goes beyond just the essence of something. I was recently watching an artist on YouTube who does abstracts, and they're very colorful and have a lot of different shape and movement, and they're very interesting. They're not something I would want to hang on my wall, but they are interesting to look at, and it's an interesting process to watch. But I was surprised when she said what her main influence is. And as she talked about her main influence, I began to see it a little, but it's not how I saw her work, which is interesting. So this is an abstract representation of something I found interesting and beautiful in nature. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong that when I explain what the inspiration was, I feel like people would be able to see that if they had an idea of what a salmon looks like. I love that art isn't just about what the artist brings to it, but also the viewer. And there is no piece of art or style of art that everyone will love. There's no artist that anyone will love all of their work. Well, I guess maybe. But art is subjective. And that makes accepting when people don't appreciate your work or enjoy your work or like it or love it, it's okay. If you create art and even if people you love don't appreciate it or think it's good from their perspective, don't be concerned about it. Create what you want to create. I am really enjoying looking at things in nature in a close-up way and creating something inspired by that. I'm currently working on a blue morpho butterfly wing. You may have seen a short or two where I am creating papers for that. So I think this is an interesting development in my art style, and I'd like to explore it for a little while. I'd also like to do some more abstract landscapes with translucent layers, and of course I'm working on the workshop that is strictly about that and using only translucent layers to create an abstract landscape. But I also have other ideas for workshops beyond that, and just exploring art for the pleasure of it. And I hope that my videos encourage you to do that. If you are feeling encouraged to make some art, if you are enjoying this process video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Well, because they make me feel good and because it helps the algorithm. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments. I always appreciate those kind comments too. And I also would like to know what you are interested in seeing from me and having me share. I'm continuing to work on the pink here, getting progressively lighter. And if you caught last week's video, you know that I went ahead and created some iridescent white papers that I was able to capture the translucence of because I wanted to have less gray along what would be the belly area of my fish. If you have not yet subscribed, I invite you to do so you can stay up to date with my studio videos that are supposed to come out on Wednesday, and this one is running behind. And also on Sundays, I share a creative self-care art making prompt video as part of my Better with Art series. I am so glad that you have joined me for this demonstration of how I created my Salmo Salar piece and the latest evolution of my style to embrace the beauty of nature and try to capture it in a new and different way. I really like how that paper turned out. And again, my not straight edges. So this piece that I had to draw to a close, when I revisit it to finish it, there will be more blending between the layers, so it won't be so harsh. And as I previously mentioned, up in that upper right corner, I want to get that white area to be more gray. I did have some struggles with that piece and getting it laid down smoothly. One thing I should have tried, and I had been thinking about earlier and should have gone back to, should have gone to, especially now with the trouble with this piece, is wetting the piece of collage paper. A water spray bottle is an invaluable tool in many aspects of mixed media art. And it wasn't that long ago when I discovered how helpful it can be to get your pieces of collage paper down smoothly. I really like how that turned out. But again, I do want to soften that edge. So thank you again for joining me in my studio. As you can see, I continue to have fun, and I feel like a big part of my purpose in life is to encourage people to make art, to reclaim their creativity and use art making as a means of creative self-care. We are wired for creativity, made in the image of the creator. And the creation is full of some amazing opportunities to be inspired. There is an example of the glue. I did want to cover the rest of the white spots at the bottom. As mentioned, I will be completing this. I can show you at a later date when you come back and visit me in the studio. Be sure to check the description for items that I have used, as I mentioned, and a link to be notified of upcoming online and in-person workshops and demonstrations where you can make art with me, and shows where you can see my art, or perhaps me and my art jewelry.